Good evening. I'm Laura Barone-Lopez. Jeff Bennett and Amna Nawaz are away. On the NewsHour tonight, New Year's celebrations turned to horror. A driver tore through Bourbon Street in New Orleans, killing and wounding multiple people in what's being investigated as a terrorist attack. After decades of work, Jimmy Carter's goal of eradicating a tropical disease appears within reach. We examine the lasting global health legacy the late president leaves behind. And new research shows exercise could be the most potent medical intervention ever known.
Stressing our bodies with exercise in just the right amount actually prepares our bodies to deal with the stress of everyday life.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
the Charles F. Kettering Foundation, working to advance inclusive democracies. Learn more at kettering.org.
The Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. At least 15 people are dead and dozens injured after a man driving a truck barreled through the French Quarter in New Orleans early this morning, where people had gathered to usher in the new year. Authorities found an ISIS flag and weapons in the truck. The suspect, a U.S.-born citizen, is dead, and the FBI is investigating the attack as an act of terrorism. A warning: video of the attack is disturbing. In New Orleans, what should have been a night of celebration ringing in the new year ended in terror. Authorities say at around 3:15 a.m., the suspect plowed a white Ford pickup truck into a crowd on Bourbon Street. After crashing the vehicle, the driver fired at police officers on the scene. Law enforcement intervened, killing the man, identified today as 42-year-old Samsuid Dim Jabbar. All of this leaving an unimaginable trail of destruction and lifeless bodies in the streets. Today, a coroner van on the city's main roads, a popular area known for its bars and live music. Now, an active crime scene. More than 30 people were injured, including 2 police officers shot that remain in stable condition. Witnesses described the scene as surreal.
What we saw was insanity. I mean, something out of a movie. The graphic nature of it, and it was unbelievable.
Authorities say he was dressed in military gear and had an ISIS flag inside the vehicle. New Orleans Police Superintendent Ann Kirkpatrick.
And because of the intentional mindset of this perpetrator who went around our barricades in order to conduct this, he was hell-bent on creating the carnage and the damage that he did.
The FBI does not believe the suspect acted alone and is asking the public for help.
We're asking if anyone has had any interaction with the deceased subject Jabbar in the last 72 hours, provide us with this information.
President-elect Donald Trump implied the attacker was an immigrant, saying, quote, "When I said that the criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals we have in our country, it turned out to be true." But authorities confirmed the suspect was a U.S.-born citizen from Texas and an Army veteran. New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell told residents her priority is safety.
The mission now is to facilitate, support, and coordinate safety procedures to keep our residents and our visitors safe. We're taking every necessary step to put even more safety procedures in place, especially given the nature of the investigation.
Increased police presence can be seen around the area as the investigation continues. The Sugar Bowl College playoff, initially scheduled for tonight just blocks from the attack, has been postponed until tomorrow. For insight into the ongoing terrorism investigation, we're joined by Bruce Hoffman, Senior Fellow for Counterterrorism and Homeland Security at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's advised the CIA and has studied terrorism and insurgency for 5 decades. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us this evening. The suspect was an Army veteran, and he had an ISIS flag in his truck, according to authorities. How significant is it that he had that ISIS flag, and what else stands out to you?
The ISIS flag is enormously significant because it's very clear he was trying to situate this act of violence in a political context, indeed in a terrorist context, and show allegiance or support of ISIS's aims.
Law enforcement has said that they don't believe that the suspect, Samsua Jabbar, was acting alone. So what can we infer so far from what we know about who else might be involved or what this means?
This is what's so alarming about this particular incident, is it wasn't just a matter of someone getting in a truck and driving from Texas to Louisiana and carrying out an attack. It's believed that at least 2 other improvised explosive devices were found in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and that several other men and a woman have been captured on video planting them there. So this suggests some conspiratorial dimension to the attack, which means that this may not be isolated.
Right. Authorities did say in the last few hours, though, that they're not sure if that man and woman were involved or connected to the suspect. But there's a lot that we still don't know. And again, based on the information that we have so far, how likely is it that the suspect was inspired or directly linked to ISIS?
It's difficult to say. It's clear that he was going through some personal crisis. He had financial problems, for example. He was recently divorced. He's a recent convert to a religion, for example. All of those things may have played in his mind of doing something daring, dramatic, and violent that would all of a sudden catapult him into some sort of infamous notoriety, but notoriety nonetheless, as opposed to having been a failure at everything else that he's tried. And what we know from the recruitment and radicalization of individuals is that members of terrorist organizations, handlers, play on individuals' personal weaknesses or their personal traumas and attempt to get them to engage in acts of violence that in normal circumstances they might never have contemplated.
Are there similarities between this attack, between what we know about the suspect, and past U.S.-grown acts of terrorism that may or may not have been linked to ISIS?
Well, we really have to put this in a broader context. ISIS, for at least the past decade, has deliberately targeted highly populated, let's say, celebratory type of events. The Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, England in 2017, for instance. Just this past summer, there was an attempted attack on the Taylor Swift concert in Vienna, Austria. So ISIS has generally, in recent years, been striking at events where there's densely populated, in essence, well-attended. They're celebrating something, whether it's a concert or, as in this morning's tragedy, a New Year's Eve event, and trying to find places where they can kill lots of people, but also get lots of attention.
ISIS has been substantially weakened in recent years, but what reasons would they still have to attack the U.S.?
Well, one of the main reasons is that during the Trump administration, for example, on several occasions, President Trump proclaimed the defeat of ISIS, which was in fact the case. The international campaign against ISIS from 2014 to 2019 destroyed the caliphate. This could be a way of ISIS poking at the United States, especially as the inauguration is only 3 weeks away.
I mean, could this attack indicate that ISIS might still have more influence than we previously believed in the ability to conduct an attack like this on U.S. soil?
Absolutely. Let's not forget that there was an aborted ISIS plot that was derailed in October to stage an attack in Oklahoma City on Election Day. So unfortunately, we have to see this morning's events as not necessarily an aberration.
Bruce, what are you looking for as the investigation moves forward?
I think the biggest question is, was this a broader conspiracy, and who are the fellow conspirators, and what conceivably might be next? I would say, secondly, it's whether that explosion, a very mysterious explosion of a Cybertruck outside of a Trump-owned hotel in Las Vegas, is in any way connected to this event as well. It seems odd that 2 electric vehicles are involved in explosions on the same day.
Bruce Hoffman, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
You're very welcome.
Let's turn now to possible security lapses in New Orleans. For that, I spoke a short time ago with Juliette Kayyem, a former assistant secretary at the Department of Homeland Security and faculty chair of the Homeland Security program at Harvard's Kennedy School. Juliette, thank you so much for joining us today. Given your expertise, how was a vehicle able to ram into a crowd? And from a physical security standpoint, could more have been done to prevent this?
The evidence is starting to suggest yes. So in 2016, New Orleans changed its sort of safety and security positioning for Bourbon Street specifically. That was after two major terrorist attacks in Europe, in Nice in France and Berlin in Germany, in which automobiles were used. In that instance, or afterwards, New Orleans put up three different security measures. It's the barricades, the bollards, which we'll get to in a second, and then basically trucks, but it's basically sanitation trucks, so that you would have this layered security. What we're starting to learn and what's being disclosed is that second, these sort of cement entities that would really essentially tear up a car if it was trying to ram through Bourbon Street were not functioning, that they were being upgraded, presumably for the Super Bowl in a couple weeks, and therefore we're not ready for this big event. And that's what everyone is focused on right now, is whether alternative measures, alternative security were used and whether they were sufficient enough. Look, any terrorist who really wants to kill could have just gone down the street and gotten another group of people. But obviously, you want to protect areas that are going to have the greatest risk and the greatest density of people.
Juliette, authorities have said that the suspect may not have acted alone. Was this a city security failure or something larger?
The larger question, at least in terms of what we're hearing from public officials, that this perpetrator did not act alone. We have no clarity on who he may have acted with, and therefore whether the city is safe tonight and, of course, tomorrow when they are going to finally host a delayed Sugar Bowl tomorrow night. It's that discrepancy between saying that the city should be open and people should move forward, and the potential that there might be co-conspirators is something that they're going to have to answer to. It's a legitimate question for reporters and the citizens to ask of public officials. If they are wrong about there being co-conspirators, that's actually good news. It shows a horrible incident, but one that can be managed by the city, and it can move forward faster.
You said that there should have potentially been a backup option to those barriers on Bourbon Street that were not being used at the time of this attack. What next steps are you looking for in this investigation?
I think an honest accounting. There was a press conference today that seemed just remarkably defensive. I don't think that's a good posture for New Orleans, nor for the police department. We need an honest accounting of what were those alternative measures. Were they focused on the wrong event, so to speak? In other words, the Super Bowl is in a couple weeks, and so they were rushing for that, but forgetting they had a high risk, high profile event. What we also have to figure out is, why were there sanitation trucks, and were they removed after midnight? So any buildup to a risky event is also going to have a drawdown, and that drawdown may have happened at 2 a.m., 2:30 a.m. Did that create greater vulnerabilities for the people who were still partying on the street on New Year's Eve? And those are the questions, operational questions, that have to be asked and answered honestly, not just for New Orleans, but every other city that is going to do this. Paris, for example, has learned they essentially keep a sort of hardcore security posture in Paris, almost impossible to get vehicles in for New Year's Eve until 6 or 7 the next morning. These may be the lessons that we have to learn from this tragedy that happened today.
Juliette, you write in The Atlantic today that New Orleans needs to return to normal as quickly as possible. But how safe is it to be in New Orleans right now? And is it feasible and safe for the Sugar Bowl to continue tomorrow?
So I think the delay was appropriate. I think it needs to guarantee that there's no ongoing threat. So what kind of changes can they make to security planning for the bowl that will assure safety and also assure the perception of safety. You want people to have a good time. And I think I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You don't want terrorism to hold captive an entire city indefinitely. They may never find these people. You want to be able to move forward. So those were the two major aspects, both in terms of what an accounting of, is it safe? Who are these potential co-conspirators? And secondly, what changes are they going to make to the security posture to move forward? I am not a fan of cities closing down for long periods of time. We've learned in the past they create more tension, more fear, more isolation. They generally aren't beneficial in terms of finding people. But most importantly, they give the terrorist a narrative that is greater than they should. It makes them feel more powerful. Look, we can close down the Sugar Bowl in all of New Orleans in the first week of 2025. And I think there's something important about giving a counter narrative.
Juliette Kayyem, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The day's other news begins with the restoration of power in Puerto Rico following an island-wide outage that struck on New Year's Eve. The U.S. territory's private energy provider says that as of this afternoon, 98% of its customers have their lights back on. But Luma Energy warns there could be temporary outages in the coming days as it works to fully restore power across the island. The exact cause of the outage is still under investigation, but early indications point to a problem with an underground power line. At the peak of yesterday's outage, nearly 90% of Luma Energy customers were without power, forcing people to start the new year in darkness. And in Las Vegas, authorities say one person is dead and 7 others were injured today when a Tesla Cybertruck caught fire and exploded outside the city's Trump International Hotel. Eyewitness video captured the vehicle as it burned in the valet area of the hotel. The driver is the only known fatality. The cause of the explosion is unclear, though a law enforcement official tells the Associated Press that the truck appeared to be carrying a load of fireworks. Authorities are reportedly investigating the explosion as a possible act of terror. Authorities in New York City have arrested and charged a 23-year-old man after a Manhattan subway passenger was shoved onto the tracks as a train approached. Security camera footage shows the 45-year-old victim wearing an orange jacket being pushed violently from behind. Police say he's in critical but stable condition. The suspect has been identified as Kamel Hawkins. He has been charged with attempted murder and second-degree assault. It's just the latest act of violence to raise concerns among New York's transit passengers. The police figures show major crimes on subways are down compared to last year. Israeli airstrikes killed at least a dozen Palestinians in Gaza overnight as the war grinds on into the new year. Hospital officials say one strike hit a refugee camp in central Gaza, killing a woman and child. Israeli forces say the attack was in response to militant rocket fire that had come from the area. Another strike hit a home in northern Gaza, killing 7 and wounding dozen others. The Israeli military has been conducting a major offensive in that area since early October. Ukraine is putting the brakes on Russian gas flow through its pipeline network to European customers. The shutoff in supplies comes nearly 3 years after Russia invaded Ukraine. That's because a 5-year agreement between the two countries had kept the gas flowing. But the deal expired at the end of 2024, and Ukraine has refused to extend it. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico said the stoppage will have a drastic impact on European Union countries, but not on Russia.
Nikto, opakujem, nikto netlačí Slovensko preč.
Nobody, I repeat, nobody is pushing Slovakia away from the European community. But we must see that selfish national interests are beginning to dominate this community. In world politics, it absolutely applies that it does not matter whether elephants love or fight. The grass always suffers. I do not want Slovakia to be such grass.
Before the war, Russia supplied almost 40% of the EU's natural gas via pipelines. But by 2023, their share had dropped to around 8% as the EU moved to diversify the bloc's energy sources. The U.S. and Norway have stepped in to fill the gap, becoming the 2 largest suppliers to Europe. In South Korea, investigators say they've extracted black box data from the Boeing jet that crashed at Muon International Airport on Sunday, killing 179 people. They hope to use the information to determine the exact cause of the crash. Transport Ministry officials are also sending a damaged flight data recorder to the U.S. for analysis. Today, relatives of the victims visited the site to pay respects to their loved ones. Officials say they have identified all of the victims. Only 2 people survived when the Boeing 737-800 jet skidded off the end of the runway and slammed into a concrete fence, bursting into flames. And a Navy medic who survived the attack on Pearl Harbor has died. Harry Chandler was a hospital corpsman on the morning of December 7, 1941, when Japanese planes dropped bombs and fired on ships in the harbor. He helped pull injured sailors from the oily waters after the attack. Chandler told the Associated Press in 2023 that he saw the planes approach as he was raising the flag at a nearby mobile hospital. He's the 3rd survivor to die in recent weeks. With his passing, only 15 remain. Harry Chandler was 103 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, the election result for a North Carolina Supreme Court seat is held up by legal challenges. And an English town that's been on the decline places its hopes on the success of its soccer team.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
For more than 4 decades after leaving the White House, President Jimmy Carter channeled his work on the world stage through his nonprofit Carter Center. One of the key achievements, the near eradication of guinea worm disease, which once affected 3.5 million people. Last year, there were just 14 cases reported in Africa. That's why, as William Brangham reports, Carter's work promoting global public health is being remembered by many as a core piece of his legacy.
The Carter Center's efforts span more than 80 countries and help bring about the eradication of diseases, the delivery of life-saving drugs to far-flung areas, and a focus on improving mental health care. To examine this work that was so important to Jimmy Carter, we are joined again by Dr. Peter Hotez. He's co-director of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development and dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine. He worked with Jimmy Carter on neglected tropical diseases. Dr. Hotez, great to have you back on the program. When you look at Jimmy Carter's legacy on this front with regards to global public health, what stands out the most to you?
I think for me, it's the fact that the president really hit home for the world that health is a fundamental human right. Just like people have a fundamental right to access to food, water, and shelter, they also have a fundamental right of access to being free from ancient scourges like guinea worm, like river blindness, like lymphatic filariasis, diseases that are not household names here in the United States, but globally they're among the most common afflictions of people living in poverty. He, more than anyone else, I think, really hit home the fact that people have a fundamental right to be free of these parasitic and neglected tropical diseases.
And a lot of his work was in the field, but it wasn't only in the field. I mean, he was also just as active twisting arms of world leaders and pharma executives and business leaders, using the leverage that only a former president can really do. How important do you think it was to have someone of his stature pointing the finger at these issues?
Yeah, this is what was absolutely game-changing, to have a former president of the United States, arguably the most powerful nation in the world, focus his attention on diseases that represent the most common afflictions of the world's poor. For me, that was, for those of us who worked in global health, of course, that was so inspirational, but it really held elected leaders and leaders of foreign countries' feet to the fire, both in terms of low and middle income countries, as well as at the advanced countries, high income countries, to really pay attention to these illnesses. And there was nothing like the power of the president to provide that kind of advocacy.
You've hinted at this already, but do you have a good sense as to why this suddenly became such an important mission in his latter life?
I think, throughout his presidency and something permeating the president's life and his wife Rosalind, who was a real champion of vaccines as well, was service and helping those in need. And when he asked Dr. Foege, Bill Foege, to head the Carter Center, his original plan, my understanding, was that it was not necessarily around global health, but Dr. Foege convinced the president that this had to be on the forefront as well, and he quickly got it. Now we're at a place where more than 1 billion people annually receive these donated medicines for neglected tropical diseases, and a lot of that is happening through a USAID program that I worked with the president on. So imagine more than 1 billion people now receive those treatments, and this is an extraordinary legacy for the president.
I want to play a clip from a 2010 story that my colleague Fred DeSam Lazaro did. He went to South Sudan with Jimmy Carter. This was on one of their guinea worm eradication missions there. And Carter is describing how they wanted to use an insecticide in this pond to kill the guinea worm eggs and larvae. But the locals there were resistant to it because the pond was very, very precious to them. Here's how Carter solved that problem.
In fact, the ponds of water were looked upon as sacred. If that particular rain-filled pond hadn't been there, the village wouldn't have existed. They wouldn't be alive. And of course, we said that the pond was in effect sacred, but there was a curse on their pond. And if they would just help us remove those guinea worm eggs from their pond, or from the drink of water that they took out of the pond, then that curse could be removed from their pond and their village forever. So we had, you might say, not only a philosophical, but also a theological explanation to make.
How critical is that level of cultural competency for this kind of work? Because certainly a former president of the United States could have come in and said, look, we know how to do this, just let us do it, but he didn't.
Yeah, this was something also really special about President Carter. And by the way, the good work of the Carter Center, which still continues today, that it's not all top down. Yes, of course, President Carter was talking to leaders of low and middle income countries, talking to the leadership of the World Health Organization and UNICEF and other international UN agencies. But then he was also talking to the people who were the recipient of these medications and treatments and approaches to ensure that there was community ownership. And that was really special because he recognized that without community ownership, none of these interventions were going to be sustainable. And that was what was going to allow it to continue. And that continues to permeate, for instance, the program from our U.S. State Department at USAID for neglected tropical disease control is to ensure that there is that ownership at the local government level and equally important at the community level, all again, part of his extraordinary legacy.
All right, Dr. Peter Hotez, thank you so much for sharing your remembrances of Jimmy Carter with us.
Thank you.
It's been nearly 2 months since Election Day, but control of a seat on the North Carolina State Supreme Court is being held up in, well, the courts. As Stephanie Sy explains, the trailing candidate is asking for more than 60,000 votes to be invalidated.
After more than 5.5 million ballots were cast in the Tar Heels state, this contest came down to 734 votes, separating incumbent Democrat Allison Riggs from her Republican challenger Jefferson Griffin. Griffin says there were voting irregularities that could have changed the outcome. Here to explain the dispute and the stakes is Rusty Jacobs, voting and election integrity reporter for public radio station WUNC. Rusty, it's a pleasure to have you on the NewsHour. Judge Griffin, the Republican challenger, is asking for 60,000 votes. He's asking the court system to throw these votes out. Now, that's just about 1% of the votes, but in a contest that I understand came down to 0.02%, that matters. What irregularities is he alleging?
He's alleging in most cases that 60,000 of these ballots or so were cast by voters who were not completely registered or registered appropriately. Essentially, it comes down to this issue over registration forms that predated what was the Help America Vote Act, the HAVA Act, early 2000s. It passed. Once that law passed, registration required a voter to either provide the last 4 digits of their social security number or a driver's license number. Some voters in North Carolina registered with forms that predated passage of that act. This issue has been brought up before and has been dismissed by a federal district court judge. And in the lead up to the most recent election, the State Board of Elections also reviewed allegations that these people were improperly registered and therefore ineligible to vote, and they dismissed that claim. And they looked into it. In all these cases, voters who cast ballots in the most recent election had to provide either photo ID or fill out an exception form. All of those ballots had to be reviewed by local boards of election. Anybody who cast a ballot, those ballots were reviewed and their eligibility was confirmed.
Why is Mr. Griffin so confident that were these 60,000 ballots to be thrown out, it would help him or change the outcome of the election? Do we know the registered parties, for example, of who these voters are?
The pool of voters swept up in these ballot protests filed by Judge Griffin. It includes voters of all registrations, Republican, Democrat, unaffiliated. It also happens to include the parents of Allison Riggs, the incumbent that he's running against. It includes an editor from my station, WUNC. These are valid voters. And that was one of the reasons why the Board of Elections and a federal district court judge said you can't just summarily throw these people's ballots out. For all intents and purposes, these are eligible voters who maybe due to some clerical error, their registration might seem incomplete, but it's not a reason to keep them from having their vote counted.
His opponent, Judge Riggs, has been quoted as saying he's trying to engineer the election. I wonder what the stakes really are, though. It's not as if this election itself determines even the political makeup of the state Supreme Court, which is a 5-2 Republican majority. So what is at stake with this outcome, not just in North Carolina, but perhaps broadly, as we see these types of legal maneuverings in other races as well around the country?
What's at stake really is public trust in elections, elections administration, and election integrity. There's nothing unusual about a race outcome looking like it did in this case at the end of Election Day. You have a tight race between 2 judicial candidates. And then over the course of the 10-day canvass period, when all the final ballots are being counted, when provisional ballots are being validated, when absentee ballots are being finalized by boards of election, and if you have a slim margin and the outcome is different after the canvass period than it was at the end of Election Day, that is not unusual. But since at least 2020, candidates like Donald Trump, many Republican candidates have tried to exploit tight races like this, where provisional ballots, where ballots that come in at the end of the Election Day process may change the results. They've sought to exploit that and to try to conjure up lack of trust in the process. But this is the process. This is how it works. There were 2 recounts that came out at the end and showed still a very tight race. Now you have a candidate who is trying to convince courts to invalidate ballots that by and large seem to have been cast by eligible voters. If those legal processes are used to change what seems to be a reliable outcome, that could really damage public trust in the elections administration.
And it could be a playbook for other contested elections in the future. Rusty Jacobs, a reporter at WUNC, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Today, many Americans are making a New Year's resolution to exercise more. It's well known that regular exercise is good for your health. But a new scientific consortium is revealing fresh insights into just how profound the benefits are for the human body. William Brangham spoke recently with someone who's helping lead this research, Ewan Ashley. He's a professor of cardiovascular medicine and genetics at Stanford University and the newly named chair of its Department of Medicine. And he calls exercise the single most potent medical intervention ever known.
Ewan Ashley, so good to have you on the NewsHour. You are undertaking this massive multidisciplinary study to understand how exercise changes our body in some fundamental way. But as I mentioned, don't we already know a lot of this? I mean, what is the importance of doing this much deeper dive that you're doing?
Well, we've known for maybe 70 years that exercise was among one of the most potent medical interventions known. We knew from studies in the 1950s comparing London bus drivers and London bus conductors that lived in the same environment, but the bus drivers were sitting, the conductors were standing, and the heart disease rate among the drivers was twice that of the conductors. So yes, we've known for 70 years that exercise is really, really good for you. But we have not, through that entire time, really understood how it works. So the new study was to bring together 17, 18 different groups from across the United States to really study, to build a molecular map of exercise, to try and work out how come this intervention that's so available to all of us is the most powerful intervention known. How does it actually work?
And so you've started to publish some of your findings. When you compare exercise to these other critical things that we know are important for health, diet or sleep or things like that, where does exercise fit in? What are the sort of top-line findings of exercise's potency?
Well, one of the things that really surprised us, we're all exercise people already, so we were all convinced as to the benefits, although in this study, we also had a control group. So the first study we released was of rats that were sedentary, and then they were trained over the course of 8 weeks, aerobic training, literally on a treadmill. And then at the end of the period of time and at the end of several time points along that 8-week time period, we looked at the tissues from the rats. And the thing that we were really surprised to find was that really they turned into almost different beings. I mean, exercise was that potent. Every single tissue we looked at showed something completely different from before. It really changed the entire molecular makeup of the individual organs of the rats in a very positive direction. One example might be that multiple tissues, for example, fat tissue. Another example would be the mitochondria, that are little battery-like organelles inside each cells. When we looked at the changes with exercise, we often saw mirror image changes to the ones we see with disease. So exercise was quite literally kind of reversing in a mirror image-like way the changes that happen with disease and explaining a little bit about how exercise manages to protect from those diseases.
I mean, some of the other findings I read in your initial research is showing that exercise impacts the body in ways that we don't associate with exercise, the digestive system, the mood and mental health. How do you explain that mechanism being so widespread?
Well, I think one of the things is that exercise at the end of the day is a stress. And we don't recommend stress for anyone, certainly not work stress. But the reality is, I think, that stressing our bodies with exercise in just the right amount actually prepares our bodies to deal with the stress of everyday life. One of the biggest signatures we saw was in a system that basically tends to the proteins in our cells. So it helps them come together in the right format in 3 dimensions. It stops them sticking together and aggregating. And when it's time for those proteins to be renewed, it helps. It's called the heat shock response. And this was something that we saw changed across multiple tissues, across all the tissues, as you mentioned, lung, skeletal muscle, heart, not just the ones that you might expect. We would expect perhaps skeletal muscle and heart for sure, but we were seeing changes in the kidney, in the adrenal gland, in the intestine, in the brain. And I think that begins to get at how exercise is just such a remarkable intervention. Essentially helping with, for example, reducing the risk of heart disease by 50%, reducing the risk of many cancers by 50% and more, reducing the risk of back pain. People sleep better, they have better mood, they're able to breathe better. There are just so many ways in which exercise helps. And I think the key is just stressing you just enough so that your body then in recovery builds these mechanisms that help you deal with the stress of life in other ways.
And I understand there have been some interesting gender differences in your results. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think one of the other things we were really surprised by was just the extent of the changes. In this study, we had both male and female rats, and of course we expected to see some changes, but really the changes were profound. And we saw them both at rest before we started, but also with exercise. Some things got closer together with exercise between the sexes, some things got further apart. And this was the case particularly in adipose tissue and in skeletal muscle, where we really saw very profound differences between the two sexes. And I think what it led us to believe is that really every study from now on should be done with both sexes. This is something we've known for some time, but over the history of science, we've tended, just because science costs a lot of money, to choose one or the other. We do studies in all males or all females or both when we could, but often the numbers were smaller then, and that gave us less power for discovery. What's really clear, I think, from this study is that we really have to do both sexes in order to really work out what the differences are and be able to describe them adequately for both sexes.
I know people listening to you will, of course, be wondering, I'm sure you get this question all the time, what kind of exercise, how often does it matter, when I do it, how much I do it? What does your research indicate?
Well, this particular research with the rats doesn't answer that question, but fortunately we have lots of research to give us a good answer to that question. And although you read lots of different things as every new study comes up, the overall advice has remained the same. The first thing is, any movement is better than none. So if you're in a sedentary job or you're not used to moving much, then just stand up. Standing up is a good start. If you can walk, take some walking paces, go for a walk at lunchtime, that's great as well. If you can get 30 to 45 minutes of moderate intensity exercise, that's like a brisk walk. If you can do that 5-6 times a week, that's fantastic. And of course, if you want to do more, there's added benefit. One of the things I regularly tell my patients, I'm a cardiologist, is that 1 minute of exercise buys you 5 minutes of extra life, which means you definitely have time to exercise. Because even if you exercise even a little bit higher intensity, you get 7 or 8 minutes of extra life. So you definitely have time to make in your day to exercise. It doesn't matter whether you do it in the morning, at lunchtime, in the evenings, particularly good after meals. So the evening is a fine time to take a brisk walk. But the main thing is get up, move about as much as you can.
You and Ashley of Stanford University, such fascinating research. Thank you so much for talking with us about it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
On this holiday, we return to Ipswich in eastern England and its precious soccer, or should we say football club. Our man in Britain, Malcolm Brabant, is from Ipswich, and he visited earlier this year just as his club was returning to the top tier of British football, the Premier League. Since then, it's been a very rough road for the team. They're near the bottom of the league. But on Monday, a stunning victory. They beat legendary Chelsea 2-0, winning their first home Premier League match since 2002. Here's a second look at Malcolm's story that charts the team's fairy tale rise since American investors took over.
You may have Fenway Park, Yankee Stadium, the Rose Bowl, the Astrodome, but for me, the Field of Dreams will always be Portman Road.
Chapman, Burns again, another opportunity. It's Burns!
It just has this real good family feel. It's a lovely place to live. It's a one-club town.
The club has got its footballing identity back again.
They were a towering partnership for both Ipswich and England, Russell Osman and Terry Butcher, who famously shed blood for his country.
The whole county loves watching Ipswich Town Football Club play. So, yeah, it's part of your soul, and as the old saying goes, it's part of your DNA.
Atmosphere's incredible. Literally something that we wished as a kid. Literally, we saw the generation go up Premiership, now it's their turn to enjoy it, so it's good.
It's living a dream that I was dreaming upon when I was a child. Football's everything, and this club's everything to me.
Darling, I will be loving you.
The team's shirt sponsor and minority stakeholder is a local lad by the name of Ed Sheeran.
People like success stories like this. It is a grassroots club, and it just feels like it's lifted up the town as well. You know, like Ipswich has gone through some tough years, and this feels great for the area.
Ipswich is the town where I went to school, misspent my youth, and to be honest, got away from as quickly as possible. This region is a rural backwater. The clue is in the nickname of the football team, the Tractor Boys. After an absence of 22 years, Ipswich are back in English football's top tier, the Premier League. Hard to believe after this performance 4 seasons ago, which gave Tractors a bad name. Ipswich are in blue.
Young man.
When Chris Barkley and I were schoolmates, our team was one of England's best. But in 2019, Ipswich hit rock bottom.
There was a season a few years back where the football was dire, it was negative, and I described it as random acts of football. There was no thought behind it. It was an insult to your intelligence.
He's onside here. Tom Eaves into the penalty area. That's it.
I did think about giving up my season ticket then, but I'm so glad I hung on, because since we've got our new manager, it's been uphill all the way.
And this is the moment in May when Ipswich secured Premier League status after back-to-back promotions from the third and second tiers. The architect of that success is Kieran McKenna, a young coach from Northern Ireland, regarded as a genius by his players and the club's American financial backers. Do you think American drive has made a difference?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just the fact that, you know, the Americans have this attitude that if everything's going well, we will keep backing you. He's repaid them in the way that he's got the team playing.
Morsey, edge of the penalty area, strikes it, top corner, what a goal!
That he's got the supporters back at Portman Road.
One of Kieran McKenna's gifts has been to transform players from the lower echelons into all-conquering heroes. Has everybody got the potential to be a star, do you think? With the right handling?
I don't think so, and I think I understand the question. I don't think star is the word. I think everyone has the potential to improve and everyone has the potential to develop. And I said not many people are operating at their maximum capacity every game, whether that's physical reasons, technical reasons, mental reasons, tactical reasons. So it's trying to help the players in each of those areas in an environment that is built to support them.
McKenna's greatest challenge in the top flight is competing against clubs with vast budgets and world-class players. He's recruited relatively inexpensive players from lower divisions with huge potential, such as defender Jacob Greaves.
I can already definitely feel that he's improved me already in a short space of time.
That pass from Tillemans is...
But schoolboy errors like this could come back to haunt Ipswich at the end of the season.
Penalty area, Jacob Greaves sticking to him, but he's passed it straight to Morgan Rogers by the penalty spot. Back to Rogers, opportunity and in.
Oh well, time to talk to the old enemy. The Norwich City supporter.
Welcome to my home.
Thank you so much. I've known top sports reporter Mick Dennis for 50 years. His main character flaw is that he supports Norwich City, Ipswich Town's great rivals in Eastern England, who are currently in the second tier. Dennis keeps his Norwich memorabilia in the smallest room, which Ipswich fans would say is the perfect place. Mick, how much does it hurt you as a Norwich supporter that Ipswich are doing so well?
Well, it's a matter of supreme indifference to me because they haven't beaten Norwich for 5,712 days. Not that I'm counting.
Pacheco on the rebound! 5-1 at Portman Road!
I think it's extraordinarily difficult for promoted teams. Last season, the 3 promoted teams came straight back down again. Enjoy the ride at the moment.
Hutchinson just outside the penalty area. On his right foot, into the back of the net! Omari Hutchinson makes it 2!
Success has cascaded to the Greyhound pub, 10 minutes walk from the stadium.
I'm a football widow.
Because?
Because since Ipswich through the dark ages and the times, he's a very dedicated fan, and now obviously at the Premiership, football comes first.
What's the change like?
Oh, it's huge now. Actually got that buzz before a game, sort of leads up a couple of days before the actual kick-off.
Landlord Danny Lightfoot relishes the transformative power of sport.
Oh, it's amazing for us. You know, the ground sold out every game, so we're packed. All the pubs in town are the same. Yeah, before and after the games, it's been great for the economy, great for us. Just a great boost for the business.
But on the days when there's no football, Ipswich Town Centre is moribund. For example, its most historic building, the ancient house where I bought school books, is empty, as is a former old-fashioned gentleman's outfitters, where I was sacked for my negligent attitude to the clientele's inside leg measurements. Neil MacDonald is the leader of Ipswich Council.
We definitely would like to bring more business here, and part of bringing business here is to have a successful football team, a successful nightlife, successful culture offer, and all that helps attract and retain people in the town.
When I lived here, Cornhill, the central square, was bustling. Not anymore.
The main square should be the central hub of this town. You know, we should be trying to create an atmosphere like every other European city.
Sophie Alexander of the Chamber of Commerce believes Ipswich would thrive if this square was ringed with bars and restaurants.
It could be internationally renowned. We're missing out on a huge element of the tourism, the visitor economy, and this place could be so much more than what it is.
One of the main obstacles is this store, which once sold my school's uniforms. It's been empty for 12 years. The owner is from Dubai.
It's a unit that's prime location, and the owners won't look to sell it to anybody that wants a late night or an alcohol licence.
It's been a nightmare, really.
The council is hoping to break the impasse by invoking powers compelling the owner to sell.
It's so frustrating. We work very hard to improve the town, around the town.
Regenerating Ipswich will take time, so the town desperately needs the football club to remain in the top flight.
And Delap now is charging down the left-hand side. Delap into the penalty area, onto his left foot, it's Delap! It's an equaliser! And Liam Delap can't stop scoring at Portman Road!
With Kieran McKenna at the helm, there's always hope. But as English football supporters know all too well, it's the hope that often rips you apart. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Malcolm Brabant in Ipswich.
One of the world's most famous classical pianists, Lang Lang, discovered his passion for piano while growing up alongside other musicians in China. His extraordinary talent has led him to perform with diverse musical legends, from the prestigious Philadelphia Orchestra to contemporary icons like Coldplay and Metallica. Tonight, he shares his brief but spectacular take on loving what you play.
The first few years of study piano, I would say, it was more like having a little toy in my hand. So I was 2.5 when I started. The first piece was moving my heart was the Nutcracker by Tchaikovsky. I really loved that. So I grew up in China, Shenyang, which is the northeast region, and it's a very industrial city, big factories. And every day I hear music from everywhere. It was a very musical neighborhood. It was a dorm of a Chinese traditional orchestra, which my father was the principal erhu player, Chinese violin, with 2 strings only, like chopstick. I was in Beijing at age of 9. And I got fired by the piano teacher there in the conservatory. She was kind of very skeptical of my piano style. And that was very, very difficult for me. I thought my piano career is over. So when I was 17 years old, I had this big dream, to play with the biggest orchestra in America. But in the reality, I always play as a sub, waiting for somebody to get sick. You have to be ready all the time. And because the opportunity will come in very fast. And if you catch it in the right way, you are in the game. So it was the Chicago Symphony at Ravinia Festival, with Christoph Eschenbach, the conductor. The wonderful pianist, Andre Watts, got sick. That was the biggest concert that summer. When I was a kid, people sometimes call me as a prodigy. But of course, now I'm 41. It's far from that age. Sometimes the child prodigy remains child, but the prodigy went away. So the important thing is to keep the talent, but let the child go away. For me, transformation is quite an important element of a performance. I'm always trying to move my heart into somewhere and then take my audience with me. I think my music making has changed a bit since I got married, having a little kid. Sometimes it's challenging. I don't know whether I should be a little bit more strict or little bit more relaxed on his education. I'm not so sure in this moment. But he certainly make my playing more subtle, more sensitive. When we play piano, every note need to have real life, real emotions. The hard thing to do is what is behind the note? What's the meaning behind the bars? Rather than just play everything right. What's the whole story and what's the background of this piece? What is the precise, the technique behind all those virtuosic passages? My name is Lang Lang, and this is my brief but spectacular take on loving what you play.
And that's the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Laura Barone Lopez. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us and Happy New Year.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation. The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. Funding for America at a Crossroads was provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you.
You're watching PBS.